Good evening and welcome back to Mystic Nightfall. Tonight, we're venturing into a question that reshapes the very foundations of civilization itself. A speculation that pulls apart the threads of one of mythology's most pivotal moments and asks us to imagine a world fundamentally different from our own. What if Prometheus, the titan of foresight, the champion of mankind, never stole fire from the gods? What if that crucial act of defiance, that moment when divine flame was smuggled down from Olympus in a hollow fennel stalk, simply never happened? Tonight, we'll explore this alternate reality, this shadow world where humanity remained in darkness, where the warmth of the hearth never flickered to life, and where the trajectory of human existence followed an entirely different path. Get comfortable, settle into the darkness around you, and let's begin this journey into the world that never was. The Titan's choice and the weight of foresight. To understand what we lose in this imagined reality, we must first understand what Prometheus gave us in the world we know. His name itself carries his essence. Prometheus, meaning forethought, the Titan who saw what was coming, who understood consequence before action, who peered into the streams of time and made his choices accordingly. During the great war between the Titans and the Olympians, that cosmic struggle that shook the foundations of existence, Prometheus made a calculated decision. While his Titan brethren, including his own father, Ecological, chose to stand with Kronos and fight to maintain the old order through brute strength, Prometheus saw further. He understood that the future belonged not to raw power, but to cunning, to strategy, to intelligence. So he changed sides, offering his counsel to Zeus and the younger Olympian gods, and his foresight helped secure their victory. Zeus remembered this loyalty. When the dust settled and the defeated Titans were cast into the depths of Tartarus, Prometheus was spared. More than spared, he was honored, given a place in the new order, trusted with important tasks. It was Zeus himself who assigned Prometheus a sacred duty, to shape mankind from clay and water, to form these curious creatures who would walk the earth beneath the gaze of the gods. And Prometheus did exactly that. He crafted humanity with care, with attention, with something approaching love. As his hands worked the clay, as he breathed life into these fragile forms, Prometheus grew attached to his creation. These humans were not like the gods, not immortal and perfect. They were vulnerable, finite, struggling. And perhaps it was precisely this vulnerability that stirred something in the Titan's heart. But Zeus had clear intentions for these new creatures. Humanity was meant to be limited, powerless, existing far below the gods in capability and knowledge. They were to worship, to sacrifice, to acknowledge divine supremacy without question. Zeus wanted no rivals, no beings who might one day challenge Olympian authority. Prometheus saw it differently. He looked at humanity and saw potential. He saw intelligence waiting to be kindled, civilization yearning to be born, greatness that could emerge if only these mortals had the right tools, the right gifts. The first tension arose during a sacrifice at Mythology, where gods and mortals gathered to establish the proper rituals of offering. Prometheus, ever clever, prepared 2 portions from a slaughtered ox. One bundle contained the finest meat and edible organs, hidden beneath the unappealing stomach. The other contained only bones wrapped in glistening fat. He presented both to Zeus, inviting the king of gods to choose his portion. Zeus, seeing the attractive fat-wrapped bundle, selected it, Some say he knew of the deception but chose it anyway to justify his anger. When the truth was revealed, Zeus was furious. The god of thunder and sky had been made to look foolish, tricked by a titan he had trusted. His rage was immediate and severe. As punishment, Zeus withheld fire from humanity. If Prometheus wanted to play games, if he wanted to elevate these mud-formed mortals, then they would learn to survive in cold and darkness. No flame for warmth, no fire for cooking, no light to push back the terrors of night. It was a calculated cruelty designed to make humans suffer and to make Prometheus watch that suffering, knowing it stemmed from his own actions. And this is where our alternate history diverges. In the world we know, Prometheus could not bear it. He watched humanity shiver and starve, watched them huddle in caves without warmth, watched them die from exposure and from consuming raw, diseased meat. His foresight showed him what humanity could become with fire, the civilizations they could build, the knowledge they could accumulate, the heights they could reach. And so, he made his choice. He crept into Hephaestus's workshop on Olympus while the gods were distracted, seized a burning ember, concealed it in a hollow fennel stalk, and delivered it to mankind. It was an act of outright defiance, of rebellion against Zeus's explicit decree. And Zeus's response was terrible. Prometheus was chained to a mountain in the Caucasus, where an eagle came daily to feast upon his regenerating liver, an eternal torture for an immortal being. But in our alternate reality tonight, Prometheus makes a different choice. Perhaps his foresight shows him not just what humanity could become with fire, but what his punishment would cost. Perhaps his loyalty to Zeus, forged during the Titan War, holds stronger. Perhaps he decides that the price of defiance is too high, that his suffering would serve no purpose. Or perhaps, in this darker timeline, he simply loves the gods more than he loves his clay-formed creations. Whatever the reason, the fire stays on Olympus. The flames remain divine property, and humanity continues in darkness. A cold world without warmth. Imagine the world in those early days, before Prometheus's gift in our reality, before fire separated humans from beasts. Now extend that state not for a brief punishment, but forever. Feel the cold seeping into that reality, the permanent chill that becomes humanity's constant companion. Without fire, humans are confined to the warmest regions of the earth. The temperate zones, the northern forests, the mountain ranges, all these become forbidden territory, impassable barriers of cold that would kill within hours. Humanity clings to the warmest parts of Africa, the sun-baked plains and the tropical coastlines, never spreading across the continents as they did in our world. Even in these warm regions, the nights are treacherous. When the sun sets and darkness falls, the temperature drops. Without fire to provide warmth, without flames to heat caves or temporary shelters, humans must huddle together for body heat, pressing close in desperate clusters. The very old and the very young often don't survive the nights. Infants die from exposure. Elderly members of tribes succumb to the cold once their bodies can no longer generate sufficient heat. Predators rule the darkness absolutely. In our world, fire became humanity's first defense against the creatures that hunted us. The great cats, the wolves, the hyenas, the bears. A bonfire at the cave entrance, torches carried through the night, These simple uses of flame created a barrier that predators instinctively feared. But in this fireless world, humans have no such defense. The great cats, lions, leopards, the now extinct saber-toothed varieties, these magnificent killers hunt humans with impunity. When night falls, humans must retreat to whatever marginal safety they can find. Caves with narrow entrances that can be blocked with stones and brush. Trees that can be climbed, though sleeping in branches brings its own risks of falling. High rock formations that require scrambling to reach. But even these refuges are imperfect. A determined leopard can climb. A persistent lion can wait. A pack of hyenas can work together to dislodge stones or shake trees. So humans spend their nights in terror, listening to the sounds of hunters prowling nearby, knowing that anyone who wanders too far from the group, anyone who needs to relieve themselves or check on an alarm, might not return. The vulnerability extends beyond predators. Without fire, there is no way to purify water beyond finding the cleanest source and hoping for the best. Waterborne diseases spread easily. Parasites infest the population. Simple infections that might have been prevented or treated with fire-heated water or cauterization become death sentences. And then there is the matter of food. Humans in this timeline remain scavengers and gatherers more than hunters. Without fire, meat cannot be cooked, and raw meat carries tremendous risks. Parasites, bacteria, diseases, all these lurk in uncooked flesh. Some members of the tribe will inevitably fall ill after eating, suffering from food poisoning, from parasitic infections that riddle their intestines, from illnesses that rack their bodies with fever and pain. The human digestive system, in our reality, adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to cooked food. Cooking breaks down tough fibers, kills pathogens, makes nutrients more accessible, and allows for smaller teeth and shorter intestines since the food is pre-processed by heat. But in this alternate world, that adaptation never happens. Humans must maintain robust digestive systems capable of processing raw plant matter and occasional raw meat, systems that require tremendous energy to operate. This creates a vicious cycle. The body expends enormous energy digesting raw food, energy that cannot then be devoted to other functions like brain development or physical activity. Humans must spend more time eating to obtain sufficient calories, time that cannot be spent on tool-making, social bonding, or other activities that might advance their condition. They are trapped in a state of mere survival, their days consumed by the endless search for food that their bodies can barely process. The cold, the predators, the disease, the inadequate nutrition, all of these factors combine to keep human populations desperately small and scattered. There are no large tribes, no communities numbering in the hundreds. Groups remain tiny, perhaps a dozen or two individuals at most, because the environment cannot support more in any given area without the technological advantages that fire would bring. Death is everywhere and always. Infant mortality is staggering. Perhaps half or more of all children born die before reaching maturity. Women die in childbirth regularly, their bodies weakened by poor nutrition and constant stress. Injuries that would be survivable in our world, a broken bone, a deep cut, a twisted ankle, become fatal here because there is no fire to provide warmth during recovery, no way to heat water for cleaning wounds, no means of cauterization. The average lifespan is brutally short. Few humans see 30 years. Those who reach 40 are considered ancient, their bodies worn down by decades of hardship, their teeth rotted from raw food, their joints aching from sleeping on cold ground, their skin scarred from countless close encounters with danger. In the warmest parts of the day, when the sun beats down and provides natural heat, humans venture out to forage and hunt. They use stone tools, sharp rocks chipped and shaped by patient hands, wooden spears hardened in the sun rather than in flame. These tools are crude but functional for basic tasks: cutting plant material, scraping hides, digging for roots, occasionally bringing down small game. But these tools never advance beyond this primitive state. Without fire, there is no way to work metal. Copper, bronze, iron. These remain locked in the earth, useless ores that humans might occasionally notice but cannot possibly utilize. There is no pottery because clay cannot be fired. There are only crude baskets woven from plant fibers, animal skins used as containers, hollow gourds for carrying water. Technology stagnates completely. Every generation uses essentially the same tools as the generation before, with only tiny incremental improvements over centuries. There is no explosive advancement, no breakthrough that suddenly expands human capabilities. Progress, such as it is, occurs at a glacial pace, almost imperceptible across individual lifetimes. And perhaps worst of all is the psychological impact. Humans in this timeline live with constant grinding fear. The darkness is an enemy that cannot be defeated, only endured. Every night brings fresh terror. Every sound in the shadows might be death approaching. There is no warm hearth to gather around, no light to push back the fears that lurk in the human mind as surely as predators lurk in the physical darkness. The cold world without fire is a world where humanity exists at the very margins of survival, clinging to life with desperate determination, but unable to rise above the beasts, unable to claim any dominion over nature, unable to build anything resembling civilization. They are simply another species of large primate, notable only for their clever hands and their tendency to make basic stone tools, but not particularly special, not particularly destined for anything greater. The cognitive darkness, the absence of fire, creates more than physical hardship. It fundamentally stunts the development of the human mind itself, preventing the cognitive revolution that would have transformed our species from clever animals into the beings capable of complex thought, language, and culture. Consider what fire provided in our reality beyond warmth and cooked food. The hearth became humanity's first social center, the focal point around which communities literally and figuratively gathered. When night fell and darkness made foraging and travel impossible, our ancestors didn't simply sleep. They sat together around fires, facing each other in the flickering light, and they communicated. This communal gathering time was absolutely crucial for language development. The extended hours spent in firelit circles gave humans opportunity and motivation to develop increasingly complex vocalizations. Stories needed to be told, experiences shared, plans coordinated, social bonds maintained. The fire created both the necessity and the opportunity for language to evolve beyond simple grunts and warnings into something rich and nuanced. But in our fireless alternate world, no such gatherings occur. When darkness falls, humans must immediately seek whatever shelter they can find and remain silent to avoid attracting predators. There is no safe social time after sunset, no hours of face-to-face communication in secure surroundings. The opportunities for language practice and development are restricted to daylight hours when the tribe is scattered for foraging or to brief, hushed conversations during dangerous nights. Without these extended communication sessions, language remains primitive. Humans develop basic calls and signals, certainly, warnings for predators, indications of food sources, expressions of immediate need or emotion. But the elaborate grammatical structures, the abstract concepts, the ability to discuss past events or plan future actions in detail, these never fully emerge. The cognitive architecture necessary for advanced language may be present in human brains, but without the environmental pressure and opportunity to develop it, it remains latent, unused, like a muscle that never gets exercised. The impact on human cognition extends far beyond language. In our reality, cooking food with fire had a profound effect on brain development. Cooked food provides more calories and nutrients with less digestive effort, allowing the body to redirect energy toward maintaining and developing large, energy-hungry brains. The famous expensive tissue hypothesis suggests that as human digestive systems became smaller and more efficient, thanks to cooked food, brains could afford to become larger and more complex. In this alternate timeline, that trade-off never occurs. Human brains remain smaller, less energy-intensive, less capable of complex, abstract thought. The cognitive power that would have allowed for advanced problem-solving, long-term planning, sophisticated tool design, none of this fully develops because the biological foundation, the enhanced brain fed by cooked calories, never emerges. The social structures that fire enabled also fail to materialize. In our world, the extended family groups that could safely gather around hearths at night grew into tribes, then into communities, then into civilizations. The safety provided by fire allowed humans to live in larger groups, to form more complex social hierarchies, to develop division of labor and specialization. But in the fireless world, groups must remain small and simple. Large gatherings are impossible to protect at night. Resources cannot support dense populations without fire's advantages in food preparation and habitat management. So humans exist in tiny bands, rarely more than 15 or 20 individuals, just large enough for genetic diversity, but not large enough for significant social complexity. There are no chiefs or councils because there's no stable community to govern. There are no specialists, no dedicated tool makers or spiritual leaders or healers, because everyone must spend all their time on basic survival tasks. Society remains flat, egalitarian not from principle, but from necessity, with every adult performing essentially the same functions. Storytelling, that uniquely human activity that preserves knowledge and culture across generations, remains rudimentary. Without the safe communal environment that fire provided, stories cannot be elaborated and refined through repeated telling. The great epic cycles, the cosmological myths, the detailed historical narratives that characterized even pre-literate human societies in our world, none of these develop here. Stories remain simple, concrete, focused on immediate practical knowledge like where to find water or how to avoid certain predators. The transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next suffers accordingly. In our reality, elder humans who could no longer participate fully in hunting and gathering could still contribute by teaching younger generations, sharing accumulated wisdom during those hours around the fire. But in this colder world, the elderly are a burden that communities can barely afford, and they rarely live long enough to accumulate decades of wisdom. Knowledge is lost constantly, each generation forced to relearn basic survival skills with only fragmentary guidance from their elders. Innovation becomes nearly impossible under these conditions. New ideas require time to ponder, experiment, and refine. They require the ability to communicate complex concepts to others and to build upon previous discoveries. In the fireless world, humans are too busy surviving, too cognitively limited, too linguistically primitive, and too socially isolated to innovate meaningfully. The same basic stone tools are used for millennia with almost no modification or improvement. Abstract thought remains beyond reach. Humans in this timeline can solve immediate, concrete problems: how to crack open a particular nut, how to find water during dry seasons, how to avoid a specific predator. But contemplating the nature of existence, wondering about the stars, imagining distant places or future possibilities, creating art for its own sake, these mental activities require a cognitive sophistication that never develops. The humans of this world live entirely in the present moment, reactive rather than reflective, surviving rather than truly thinking. Even the sense of self, of individual identity beyond immediate physical experience, may be diminished. The development of sophisticated self-awareness appears to be linked to language and social interaction. Without complex language to articulate internal states, without rich social environments in which to develop and negotiate identity, humans in the fireless world may experience a more limited sense of self, their consciousness remaining closer to that of other great apes, aware, certainly, but not profoundly introspective. The cognitive darkness is, in many ways, more profound than the physical darkness. Humans remain trapped not just in the night, but in an eternal mental twilight, conscious enough to suffer, but not conscious enough to understand their suffering or imagine alternatives. They are creatures of tremendous, unrealized potential, carrying within their genes the blueprint for brilliance, but lacking the environmental triggers, fire chief among them, to activate that potential. The great irony is that these humans don't know what they're missing. They cannot conceive of civilization because they lack the cognitive tools to imagine it. They don't long for fire because they have no concept of its possibilities. They exist in their cold, dark, frightening world, believing in their limited way that this is simply what life is, that this is the natural state of being, that nothing more is possible. In this sense, the absence of Prometheus's gift is the cruelest deprivation of all. Not just survival denied, but potential denied. Not just bodies kept cold, but minds kept from ever igniting. The Titan's silent agony. While humanity struggles in the darkness below, Prometheus watches from Olympus, and his suffering is of an entirely different order from the physical torment he endured in our timeline. In the world we know, Prometheus was chained to a mountain, his body pierced by unbreakable bonds, an eagle sent daily to devour his liver. The pain was extraordinary, constant, designed to break even an immortal spirit. But that physical agony came with a certain clarity of purpose. Prometheus suffered, yes, but he suffered for something. He had acted, had defied divine authority, had given humanity the gift that would allow them to flourish. His torment had meaning. Every day, as the eagle tore into his flesh, he could look down at the world and see fires burning, see communities gathering around hearths, see civilizations beginning to rise. His sacrifice had purchased something precious. In this alternate reality, Prometheus endures no physical torture. His body remains whole, his liver intact. He walks freely through the halls of Olympus, attends the divine councils, participates in the affairs of the immortals. To any observer, he appears to be at peace, a trusted advisor to Zeus, a titan who made the wise choice during the Great War and now enjoys the fruits of that decision. But internally, Prometheus is being eaten alive by something far more insidious than any eagle: guilt, grief, and the terrible burden of foresight that his name embodies. Remember, Prometheus created humanity. His hands shaped the clay, his breath gave them life, his care guided their first faltering steps in the world. They are, in a very real sense, his children. And he watches them suffer in ways that he could prevent, but chooses not to. Every time Zeus summons him to Olympus for counsel, every time Prometheus must walk past Hephaestus's workshop, where divine fire burns eternal, every time he sees the warm hearths in the halls of the gods, he thinks about how easily he could change everything. A single ember, a hollow reed, a moment of defiance. That's all it would take to transform human existence. His foresight makes it worse. Unlike other gods who might simply observe humanity's struggles with indifference or mild pity, Prometheus can see what humans could become with fire. His gift of forethought shows him the civilizations that will never rise, the knowledge that will never be discovered, the art that will never be created. He sees the ghostly outlines of Athens and Rome, of philosophy and mathematics, of literature and music, all of it hovering in the realm of possibility, but never crossing into actuality, because the key element, the spark, remains confined to Olympus. He sees individual humans too in his visions. A child with a mind capable of brilliant innovation, dying of exposure before reaching maturity. A woman who might have been a great healer, watching helplessly as her own children succumb to preventable illness. A man who could have been a storyteller, a keeper of wisdom, torn apart by predators because he had no fire to keep them at bay. All these potential lives, snuffed out or never realized because Prometheus lacks the courage to act. And perhaps most painful of all, he sees himself in the might have been. He sees the Prometheus who chose differently, who stole the fire despite Zeus's decree, who accepted punishment in exchange for humanity's advancement. That alternate Prometheus suffers physically but stands morally tall, a champion of the weak, a rebel against unjust authority, a figure of inspiration. The Prometheus of our timeline has become, in his own mind, a coward, a being of supposedly great foresight who saw the right choice and turned away from it. His relationship with his brother Epimetheus takes on a different character here. In our reality, Epimetheus was the fool who accepted Pandora despite Prometheus's warnings, whose lack of foresight brought additional troubles to humanity. But in this timeline, there is no Pandora, because Zeus never needed to create her as punishment for Prometheus's theft. The two brothers exist in an uneasy peace, Epimetheus perhaps oblivious to the depth of Prometheus's internal struggle, living his life of afterthought without understanding the agony of forethought. Does Prometheus share his visions with Epimetheus? Does he confess his doubts, his guilt, his constant temptation to act? Perhaps he tries, but Epimetheus, whose very nature is to think after the fact rather than before, cannot grasp the weight of seeing consequences before they occur. To Epimetheus, humans are simply one of many species populating the earth. Their struggles are natural, their limitations acceptable. He cannot understand why Prometheus agonizes over creatures made of clay and mortality. The other Titans who sided with Zeus during the war, do they notice Prometheus's melancholy? Does Atlas, condemned to hold up the sky, ever wonder if Prometheus's unending freedom feels like its own kind of imprisonment? Do the Olympian gods themselves sense the Titans' disquiet? Zeus certainly notices. The king of gods is many things, but he is not unobservant. He sees how Prometheus's gaze sometimes drifts toward the mortal world below, how the Titan grows quiet during feasts, how something like longing crosses his features when topics turn to humanity. And Zeus is pleased. This is, in its way, another kind of punishment, one that Zeus never had to decree because Prometheus inflicts it upon himself. Zeus occasionally makes subtle comments, small cruelties disguised as casual conversation. He might remark on how well humanity knows its place, how appropriately limited they remain, how the natural order is preserved. He might praise Prometheus for his wisdom in not interfering with divine will, for understanding that some gifts are too great for mortals to bear. Each word lands like a dagger in Prometheus's heart, but he can say nothing, do nothing, because to protest would be to reveal his true feelings, and that might prompt Zeus to take active steps to make fire even more inaccessible, to ensure that even if Prometheus changed his mind, he could never reach it. So Prometheus endures his silent agony, day after day, year after year, century after century. Immortality, which might be a blessing under other circumstances, becomes a curse. He cannot escape his guilt through death. He cannot forget through the passage of time. Immortal memory is perfect, unrelenting. Every moment of human suffering he has witnessed remains vivid in his mind. Every vision of what could have been haunts him with undiminished clarity. Does he ever come close to breaking? Are there moments when he stands in Hephaestus's workshop, a coal burning nearby, a hollow reed at hand, his body tensed to finally act? Does the god of the forge ever notice these moments of tension, wonder what the Titan is thinking, perhaps even privately wish that Prometheus would do it, would give humanity the gift that Hephaestus himself, as a craftsman, knows they need? But each time, Prometheus pulls back. The fear of Zeus's wrath, the memory of the Titan war, and what happens to those who defy the king of gods, the knowledge that his punishment would be eternal and terrible. These considerations hold him paralyzed. Or perhaps it's not fear alone, but a kind of fatalism, a belief that the natural order, however harsh, should not be disrupted by individual will, that the gods' decree, however cruel, represents a cosmic rightness that he has no authority to challenge. Whatever his reasoning, Prometheus remains still. The fire stays on Olympus. And the Titan who created humanity cannot meet his own reflection without seeing a failure, cannot use his gift of foresight without being tormented by visions of the future that will never be, cannot exercise his immortality without it feeling like an eternal sentence to witness suffering he could have prevented. In the end, this Prometheus is perhaps the truest tragedy of all, a being with the power and knowledge to change the world who chooses, day after day, not to. His liver remains whole, but his spirit is devoured nonetheless, consumed not by Zeus's eagle, but by his own conscience, his own cowardice, his own terrible, clear-sighted foresight that shows him exactly what he has failed to do. The Pandora who never was in the mythology we know, Pandora represents one of the great complexities of the Greek mind, a gift that is simultaneously a curse, a beautiful creation designed for punishment, the first woman and the bringer of sorrows. But Pandora only exists because of Prometheus's defiance. She is Zeus's revenge, his response to the theft of fire. So in our alternate timeline where the fire remains unstolen, where Prometheus never acts, Pandora is never created. And this absence reshapes divine-human relations in unexpected ways. Zeus conceived Pandora as a specific punishment for a specific crime. When Prometheus stole fire and gave it to humanity, Zeus needed to balance the scales, to ensure that the gift came with a price heavy enough to make mortals rue their advancement. So he ordered Hephaestus to craft the first woman from clay, just as Prometheus had crafted the first men. But where Prometheus shaped humans with care and affection, Hephaestus created Pandora under Zeus's direct supervision, with specific intentions. The gods gathered to give Pandora her gifts: beauty from Aphrodite, charm and cunning from Hermes, cleverness and skill from Athena. Each contribution made her more alluring, more irresistible. She was designed to be perfect in appearance, a creation so lovely that no mortal man could refuse her. But beneath this exterior, Zeus ensured she possessed the one trait that would undo humanity: insatiable curiosity. Zeus gave Pandora a jar, mistranslated in later traditions as a box, with explicit instructions never to open it. Then he sent her to Epimetheus, Prometheus's foolish brother who lacked his siblings' foresight. Prometheus had explicitly warned Epimetheus to accept no gifts from Zeus, knowing the king of gods well enough to suspect any offering carried hidden dangers. But Epimetheus, true to his nature of thinking after the fact rather than before, saw only Pandora's beauty and welcomed her without question. And inevitably, predictably, Pandora's curiosity overcame her. She opened the jar, releasing into the world all the sorrows and evils that had been contained within: disease, suffering, toil, age, death, and countless other miseries. These scattered across the world like invisible seeds, taking root in human life, ensuring that even with the gift of fire, even with the tools of civilization, humanity would never know pure happiness or peace. Only hope remained in the jar, trapped inside when Pandora hastily closed the lid, a final ambiguous mercy or mockery from Zeus. In our fireless timeline, none of this occurs. Prometheus never steals the fire, so Zeus never crafts Pandora, so Epimetheus never receives this dangerous gift, so the jar remains forever unopened because it never exists. At first glance, this might seem like a blessing for humanity. If the sorrows in Pandora's jar were never released, then humans in this timeline avoid those additional burdens. They don't face the specific curses that Zeus designed to counterbalance fire's blessing. But the reality is far more complex and far darker. The evils in Pandora's jar were not, in the original myth, entirely new things being introduced to the world. Disease existed before Pandora. Death was always part of the mortal condition. Suffering was present from humanity's first moment. What Pandora's jar represented was an intensification, a multiplication of these existing hardships, Zeus's way of ensuring that fire's benefits would be perpetually balanced by fire's burdens. In the world without fire and without Pandora, humans don't experience the additional sufferings from the jar, true, but they also don't have fire's benefits to offset those sufferings. They face the natural, raw hardships of existence without any divine intensification, yes, but also without any divine gift to help them cope. And those natural hardships are more than sufficient to keep humanity in perpetual misery. In some ways, the humans of this timeline have it worse. In our reality, the narrative structure of the Pandora myth gave suffering a context, a story, a meaning. Humans could understand their hardships as having divine origins, as being part of a larger cosmic drama of defiance and punishment. There was a narrative framework within which to comprehend suffering. But in the fireless world, there is no such framework. Suffering simply is, endless and meaningless, without even the cold comfort of a mythological explanation. And hope, that ambiguous presence that remained in Pandora's jar, what does its absence mean? In our timeline, hope's retention in the jar has been endlessly debated. Was it mercy from Zeus, keeping the one good thing safe for humanity? Or was it cruelty, denying mortals even that comfort? The ambiguity is part of the myth's power. But in the timeline without Pandora, hope exists differently, or perhaps not at all. Not as a gift from gods, not as something contained and rationed, but as a purely human emotion that must arise from within, if it arises at all. Perhaps that's the darkest implication. In our world, even with all the suffering Pandora released, humans received fire, received the tools of civilization, received the possibility of progress. They could hope because they had evidence that their condition could improve, that human agency mattered, that effort and intelligence could build something better. But in the fireless timeline, what basis for hope exists? Humanity's condition never improves. Each generation lives almost exactly as the previous generation did, in the same poverty, the same fear, the same darkness. Hope, if it exists at all in human hearts, is irrational, unfounded, a pleasant delusion quickly crushed by harsh reality. The absence of Pandora also changes divine-human relations more broadly. In our reality, the combination of Prometheus's theft and Pandora's punishment established a particular dynamic. Gods and humans existed in a complicated relationship of gifts and curses, benefits and costs, defiance and retribution. The myths taught that divine gifts always came with prices, that progress was possible, but never without struggle, that humans could aspire to greatness, but would always face divine jealousy and limitation. But in the fireless timeline, the dynamic is simpler and more brutal. The gods are distant, largely indifferent to humanity, except as objects of idle curiosity or occasional contempt. There is no great drama of theft and punishment, no cosmic struggle between a titan champion and a jealous king of gods. There is just hierarchy, gods above, immortal and powerful, humans below, mortal and weak. The natural order unchallenged and unchanging. Zeus in this timeline has no particular grudge against humanity because they never received an inappropriate gift. He sees them as Prometheus originally shaped them, adequate objects for occasional worship, beings who know their place, a successful creation precisely because they are so limited. If Zeus thinks of humans at all, it's with satisfaction that they remain appropriately subordinate, proof that divine authority can be maintained without need for dramatic punishments. Other gods might view humanity with various degrees of interest or contempt. Athena, goddess of wisdom, might look upon their cognitive limitations with disappointment, seeing the unrealized potential for strategy and learning. Apollo might observe their lack of art and music with indifference, his creative energies directed entirely toward divine pursuits. Artemis might appreciate that humans, remaining few and scattered, barely impact the wild places she protects. Ares might find them too pitiful even for war, their conflicts too primitive to merit a god's attention. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, has perhaps the most interesting alternative fate. In our reality, his fire was stolen by Prometheus, making him complicit in humanity's advancement, whether he wished it or not. But in this timeline, his flames remain purely divine, his craftsmanship unshared, his workshop forever closed to mortal eyes. Does he ever wonder what humans might create if given access to metallurgy? Does some part of him, the craftsman's instinct to teach and share technique, wish that someone would steal his secrets and spread them to the mortal world? The absence of Pandora means Epimetheus' fate changes too. In our reality, he became Pandora's husband, and in some versions of the myth, they had a daughter named Pyrrha who married Deucalion, Prometheus' son. After Zeus's great flood destroyed humanity, Deucalion and Pyrrha were the survivors who repopulated the world. Their lineage carried forward elements of both Prometheus' foresight and Epimetheus' afterthought, wisdom and foolishness intermingled in human nature. In the fireless timeline, Epimetheus remains unmarried, childless, a minor titan of little consequence. Without Pandora to define his role in myth, he fades to insignificance. And when Zeus eventually grows tired of humanity in this timeline, as we'll explore shortly, there is no Deucalion, no human champion with Titan blood to preserve and renew the species. So the absence of Pandora is not quite the blessing it might initially appear. Yes, the evils of her jar remain unreleased, but the humans who might have benefited from that deliverance are already so burdened by natural hardship that additional divine curses would be almost redundant. And the complex dynamic relationship between gods and humans that Pandora's myth represented never develops, leaving only a stark, simple hierarchy with no possibility of change, no drama of defiance and consequence, no hope that mortal cleverness might ever challenge divine order. The woman who never was leaves an absence in the shape of possibility itself, the possibility that humans might receive both gifts and curses, that their fate might be complicated rather than simply bleak, that hope might exist even if contained and rationed. Without her, the fireless world becomes even flatter, even more deterministic, even less touched by the chaotic possibility that makes mythology and life so richly unpredictable. Civilizations stillborn. To truly understand what humanity loses in the fireless timeline, we must examine the specific civilizations, innovations, and advances that never emerge, the ghostly architecture of human achievement that exists only as unrealized potential. Begin with metallurgy, which is entirely impossible without fire. In our world, humans discovered that certain rocks, when heated to high temperatures, would melt and yield copper, later bronze, eventually iron. This progression defined entire ages of human history: the Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, each representing a quantum leap in human capability. Metal tools were sharper, more durable, more versatile than stone. Metal weapons transformed warfare. Metal cooking vessels allowed new food preparation methods. Metal ornaments enabled new forms of artistic expression. In the fireless timeline, none of this happens. Humans continue using stone tools indefinitely. Sharp-edged rocks are carefully chipped and shaped, a technology that takes hours of skilled work to produce a single implement. These stone tools are brittle, break easily, must be constantly replaced. A hunter might spend an entire day creating spear points, knowing they might shatter on first impact with prey. There is no bronze, which means no Bronze Age. The great civilizations that flourished in our timeline during this period, Mycenaean Greece, Minoan Crete, the Hittite Empire, Bronze Age China, these never exist. The very possibility of centralized states administering large populations, of professional armies equipped with standardized weapons, of extensive trade networks exchanging metal goods, all of this requires metalworking, which requires fire. There is no iron, which means the even more transformative Iron Age never arrives. In our history, iron tools allowed more efficient agriculture, supporting larger populations and more complex societies. Iron weapons shifted the balance of military power, enabling new empires while destroying old ones. The spread of iron technology was essentially a democratization of metallurgy, since iron ore was more abundant than copper or tin, making advanced tools available to more people. But in the fireless world, such democratization is moot because no metallurgy of any kind exists. Agriculture itself is stunted in this timeline. In our world, slash and burn agriculture allowed early farmers to clear forested land, with fire doing the heavy work of removing trees and undergrowth while simultaneously fertilizing the soil with ash. Controlled burning helped manage landscapes, encouraging the growth of desired plants while suppressing others. Without fire, land clearing must be done entirely by hand, an enormously labor-intensive process that limits how much area any group can cultivate. The result is that humans in this timeline never fully transition from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to agricultural ones. Some limited horticulture might develop in naturally clear areas, small gardens where easily grown plants can be tended. But the large-scale farming that supported cities and civilizations in our world never emerges. There are no permanent settlements of significant size, no granaries storing surplus harvests, no specialization of labor made possible by agricultural abundance. Without agriculture, there are no cities. The great urban centers of human history, Ur, Babylon, Memphis, Athens, Rome, Chang'an, these never materialize because cities require concentrated food production to feed dense populations of non-farmers. In the fireless timeline, humans remain in tiny nomadic or semi-nomadic bands, moving with the seasons, following animal migrations and plant growth cycles, never establishing permanent communities large enough to develop urban culture. Without cities, there is no monumental architecture, no pyramids, no ziggurats, no temples or palaces. The built environment remains forever primitive, temporary shelters constructed from readily available materials, structures that might last a season or two before being abandoned as the band moves on. There is no stone masonry because cutting and shaping large stones requires metal tools. There are no bricks because baking clay requires fire. Human architecture remains limited to what can be constructed with wood, plant fibers, animal hides, and rough stones, essentially slightly more sophisticated versions of nests. Writing never develops in any form. In our world, writing emerged from the need to keep records in complex agricultural societies, tracking harvests, recording trade, documenting laws and treaties. But in the fireless timeline, there is nothing complex enough to require written records. Even if there were, the physical media for writing are unavailable. Cuneiform tablets require fired clay. Egyptian papyrus requires processing techniques that depend on fire. Parchment and leather require preparation methods involving heat. The basic technology of writing, even before the intellectual leap of representing language symbolically, depends on fire-based production methods. Without writing, knowledge transmission remains entirely oral and thus severely limited. Complex ideas cannot be preserved across generations with any reliability. Mathematical and scientific concepts that require notation to develop remain forever beyond reach. History exists only in the fragile medium of human memory, distorting and fading with each retelling. The accumulated wisdom of millennia that written civilizations preserve and build upon simply vanishes in the fireless world, each generation starting almost from scratch, with only dimly remembered fragments of their elders' knowledge. Art, in any developed sense, barely exists. Cave paintings in our timeline used fire-based technologies, charcoal for black pigments, ochres heated to produce different red and yellow shades, animal fats rendered over fires to bind pigments. Without fire, humans in this timeline might make crude marks with raw materials, but the sophisticated artistic traditions that characterized even Ice Age humans in our reality never develop. There is no pottery because ceramic creation requires kilns. There is no glasswork, no metallic jewelry, no fired figurines. Artistic expression remains limited to what can be carved from wood or stone with primitive tools, what can be woven from plant fibers, what can be scratched into dirt or arranged with found objects. Music might exist in basic forms, human voices singing, hands clapping, sticks beating rhythms. But without the ability to craft sophisticated instruments, it remains simple. No bronze bells, no metal strings, no ceramic drums. Even wooden instruments require careful shaping with good tools, which are harder to make without fire-hardened implements. The rich musical traditions that developed alongside human civilization remain forever stunted. Maritime exploration and trade are essentially impossible. Boats require extensive woodworking, often involving fire to shape timber, to create watertight seals with pitch or resin, to craft metal fittings. Large seaworthy vessels are completely out of reach. At most, humans might hollow out logs for crude canoes useful only in calm waters close to shore. The great ocean voyages of human history, Polynesian navigation across the Pacific, Phoenician circumnavigation of Africa, Viking exploration of the Atlantic, none of these are even conceivable. Humanity remains confined to small territories, unable to spread across oceans, unable to establish far-flung trade networks, each isolated population evolving in its own small bubble, with no contact with distant peoples. Philosophy, as a formal discipline, never emerges because it requires the leisure time and social complexity that only agricultural surpluses and urban civilization provide. Humans in the fireless world are too busy surviving to contemplate abstract questions of existence, ethics, or metaphysics. The great philosophical traditions, Greek, Chinese, Indian, that shaped human thought in our timeline remain forever unborn. Individual humans might occasionally wonder about their place in the cosmos during quiet moments, but these wonderings never coalesce into systematic thought, never get recorded and built upon across generations. Science, obviously, is impossible. Scientific inquiry requires not just curiosity, but methodology, experimentation, precise observation, mathematical notation, accumulated knowledge, and peer review, all of which depend on writing, stable communities, and technologies that allow for controlled experiments. In the fireless world, humans might notice patterns in nature, that certain plants have medicinal properties, that the moon affects tides, that seasons follow predictable cycles, but they cannot move beyond pattern recognition to actual understanding of underlying mechanisms. The scientific revolution that transformed human understanding of the universe never occurs because its prerequisites never exist. Medicine remains trapped at the most primitive level. Without fire to sterilize tools, to boil water for cleaning wounds, to heat poultices and brew medicinal teas. Healing practices are severely limited. Humans might develop knowledge of which plants help with certain conditions, but even this knowledge is hobbled by the inability to process those plants effectively. Surgery is unthinkable without sterilized metal instruments. Setting bones might be attempted, but without the ability to keep patients warm during recovery, success rates are dismal. Life expectancy remains brutally short, with most humans dying from conditions that would be easily treatable in fire-using societies. Warfare, while certainly present, remains primitive and localized. Conflicts between bands are brief, brutal affairs fought with stone-tipped spears and clubs. There are no organized armies, no strategic campaigns, no siege warfare, no military innovations building on previous generations' experience. Violence serves immediate purposes: competition for resources, revenge for wrongs, occasional territorial disputes, but never develops into the large-scale organized warfare that characterized agricultural civilizations. In this sense, at least, humanity might be said to be less destructive, though this is cold comfort given that individual violence and predation keep populations tiny and terrified. Trade exists only in the most rudimentary forms. Neighboring bands might occasionally exchange goods, obsidian from one region for shells from another, useful plants from different territories. But without surplus production, without specialized crafts, without currency or standardized values, trade never becomes a significant economic activity. Each band remains essentially self-sufficient by necessity, producing for themselves everything they need with the limited tools and knowledge available. Social stratification barely develops beyond basic age and sex distinctions. There are no rulers, no priests, no merchant classes, no professional warriors, because there is no economic surplus to support non-productive specialists. Everyone forages, everyone contributes to basic survival, everyone lives at approximately the same level of desperate poverty. This equality is not an achievement of social justice, but a result of universal deprivation. Religion, while probably present in some form, humans seem to have an innate tendency towards spiritual or supernatural thinking, remains animistic and unstructured. There are no temples, no priestly hierarchies, no written scriptures, no complex theological systems. Humans might believe that spirits inhabit natural phenomena, might perform simple rituals to invoke good fortune or ward off danger, might have origin stories passed down orally. But without the social complexity that organized religion requires, faith remains a matter of individual or small group practice, never coalescing into the great religious traditions that shaped human civilization. The accumulated knowledge that we take for granted, geography, astronomy, mathematics, engineering, biology, chemistry, all of this remains not just undiscovered, but undiscoverable. The fireless humans lack the tools, the notation systems, the experimental methods, and the institutional structures necessary to develop systematic knowledge about the world. They know their immediate environment well enough to survive in it, but their understanding extends no further. Perhaps most tragically, humans in this timeline never develop a sense of history or progress. Without writing, the past quickly fades into myth and confusion. Without technological advancement, there is no sense that the future might be different from the present. Humans exist in an eternal now, each generation living essentially as their ancestors did, with no conception that things could be otherwise. They are trapped not just physically in their limited territories, but temporally in an endless cycle of survival and death. The great civilizations that might have been Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Chinese, Indian, Greek, Roman, Mayan, Incan, these exist only as ghostly possibilities, patterns of potential that never manifest, the inventions never invented, the artworks never created, the books never written, the discoveries never made. All of this haunts the fireless timeline as absence, as the vast empty space where human achievement should have been, but isn't. Humanity, in this world, is just another animal species, marginally more successful than some thanks to clever hands and basic tool use, but fundamentally limited, fundamentally trapped at the level of existence where Prometheus first created them. The divine spark that might have lifted them to greatness never ignites, because the literal spark that makes everything else possible remains locked away on Olympus, hoarded by jealous gods, withheld by a fearful titan who could have changed everything but chose instead to preserve the cruel natural order. The ecological balance. While the absence of fire keeps humanity trapped in primitive existence, it has profound implications for the natural world, creating an environment dramatically different from our own timeline, and not necessarily in ways we might expect. In our reality, humans with fire became the most transformative force in Earth's ecology. The ability to burn cleared forests for agriculture, reshaped landscapes, drove numerous species to extinction, and eventually led to the environmental challenges we face today. But in the fireless timeline, humanity's ecological footprint is minimal, almost negligible. Humans exist as one predator species among many, taking their share of resources but incapable of fundamentally altering ecosystems. The forests remain vast and largely untouched. In our world, slash-and-burn agriculture and deliberate burning to manage landscapes removed enormous tracts of forest across every continent where humans settled. Ancient forests that had stood for millennia were cleared within generations once fire-wielding humans arrived. But in the fireless world, the forests stand eternal. Human bands pass through them, harvesting what they need: nuts, fruits, game, but lacking fire's power to clear large areas. They cannot transform forest into farmland. This means megafauna that went extinct in our timeline might survive here. Numerous large animal species disappeared shortly after humans acquired advanced hunting techniques and fire management skills. The mammoths and mastodons of the Americas, the giant sloths, the saber-toothed cats, the massive marsupials of Australia, these creatures vanished in our world, their disappearance correlating closely with human expansion. But in the fireless timeline, humans pose less of a threat. Without fire to drive game into kill zones, without the ability to harden wooden spears in flames, without coordination enabled by complex language and planning, humans are less efficient hunters. They can take down small to medium prey with persistence and luck, but the true giants of the animal kingdom remain mostly beyond their reach. The great predators maintain their dominance. Lions, tigers, bears, wolves, these apex predators treat humans as just another prey species. There is no fire to keep them at bay, no weapons powerful enough to turn the tables decisively. In our world, humans eventually hunted many of these predators to near extinction or pushed them into marginal habitats. But here they thrive, their populations robust, their territories expansive. If anything, predator populations might be larger in this timeline because human interference is minimal. The relationship between humans and animals exists in a kind of terrible balance. Humans are smart enough to sometimes avoid predation through vigilance and defensive positioning, but not powerful enough to dominate the landscape. They occupy a precarious ecological niche, too clever to be easy prey, but too limited to be truly safe. Natural selection operates with full force on human populations. The slow, the careless, the unlucky are culled regularly. Only the most alert, most cautious, most physically capable individuals survive to reproduce. This has implications for human evolution in this timeline. Without fire's protective buffer, natural selection pressures remain intense. Humans might evolve to be physically hardier, better night vision for navigating darkness, more robust digestive systems for handling raw food, enhanced hearing for detecting predators, possibly even thicker body hair for warmth since artificial heat is impossible. The evolutionary path diverges from our timeline, selecting for traits that help survival in a harsh state of nature, rather than traits that enable cultural and technological advancement. Interestingly, human population size remains so small that their impact on prey species is minimal. In our world, even before fire, human hunters contributed to some local extinctions through overhunting. But in the fireless timeline, human populations are kept so low by predation, disease, and environmental hardship that they cannot hunt any species to extinction, even if they wanted to. They take a sustainable harvest simply because they lack the numbers and efficiency to do otherwise. The absence of anthropogenic fire also means the landscape burns differently. In our world, humans used fire extensively to manage land, clearing undergrowth, promoting new growth for game, creating more favorable conditions for desired plants. These intentional burnings shaped ecosystems profoundly, creating a mosaic of habitats that wouldn't exist naturally. But in the fireless timeline, only natural fires occur, lightning strikes, volcanic activity, and these burn according to natural patterns without human intervention. Some ecosystems might actually be less healthy as a result. Modern ecology has revealed that many landscapes evolved with fire as a regular component, and some species depend on periodic burning for regeneration. In our world, indigenous peoples' fire management often maintained healthier, more diverse ecosystems than exist in places where fire has been suppressed. But in the fireless timeline, humans never develop those fire management practices, so ecosystems follow purely natural fire regimes, which in some regions might mean less frequent burning and thus different plant and animal communities. Rivers and coastlines remain pristine. There is no pollution from human activity, no runoff from agriculture, no waste from dense settlements. Water quality is determined entirely by natural processes. Fish populations thrive, never facing overfishing pressure beyond what natural predators exert. Coastal habitats are undisturbed by human development. The atmosphere retains pre-industrial composition indefinitely. There are no emissions from fires, no carbon dioxide from burning forests, no pollutants from eventually industrial activities that never develop. Climate operates according to purely natural cycles without anthropogenic influence. In this sense, at least, the Earth remains as the gods created it, unmarred by human impact. But this ecological purity comes at a cost that makes it morally ambiguous at best. Yes, the forests stand, and the megafauna roam, and the waters run clear, but humans suffer terribly. The natural balance is maintained not through wise stewardship, but through human powerlessness. Humanity's minimal ecological impact is merely the reflection of their utter failure to thrive, their inability to transcend the limitations that keep them weak and few. Moreover, without human intervention, the natural world is not some peaceful paradise. Nature operates through competition, predation, parasitism, and death. Animals suffer and die constantly from injury, disease, starvation, and being eaten alive. The absence of human disruption doesn't eliminate suffering. It just means human intelligence never gets the chance to potentially reduce suffering through management and technology. There's a philosophical question lurking here. Is a world better off if one potentially transformative species is kept deliberately primitive? The gods, particularly Zeus, seem to think so in this timeline. Better that humans know their place, that the natural order remain undisturbed, that divine prerogatives go unchallenged. The earth remains as it has always been, with humans as just one more species struggling for survival rather than the dominant force reshaping continents. But Prometheus, in his silent agony, sees it differently. He sees the wasted potential, the intelligence trapped in a body without adequate tools, the consciousness forced to experience suffering without the means to alleviate it. The ecological balance of the fireless world is, to him, not harmony, but tragedy. A system that functions perfectly well by nature's standards, but crushes the beings he created and loves. As centuries pass, human populations fluctuate, but never grow substantially. Good years see modest increases, but these are inevitably followed by bad years, droughts, harsh winters, predator population, booms that drive numbers back down. Humanity exists in a steady state, never extinct, but never flourishing, maintained at the minimal, viable population by the harsh realities of a world where they have no advantages beyond basic intelligence. If we could somehow survey this alternate Earth from above, we would see vast wilderness with tiny, scattered groups of humans moving through it like motes of dust in a cathedral, present but so small and temporary as to be almost irrelevant to the grand structure around them. The planet belongs to the forces of nature and, in the Greek understanding, to the gods who govern those forces. Humanity is a footnote, an afterthought, a failed experiment in creating sentient life that went nowhere. And perhaps, in the divine council on Olympus, Zeus occasionally points this out. He might invite other gods to observe the mortal world with him, gesturing to the vast forests and thriving animal populations and the handful of cowering humans hiding from predators. See, he might say, this is the proper order. This is what happens when mortals are not given tools beyond their station. Everything in balance, everything as it should be. And Prometheus, standing nearby, says nothing. But his foresight shows him the alternative world, the one where fire burns in human hands, where forests fall and cities rise, where humanity suffers in new ways, but also thrives in ways the gods cannot imagine. Both worlds have their costs, but only one gives humanity a chance to determine its own fate. And in the fireless timeline, that chance never comes. Divine indifference and alternative paths. The question that haunts this alternate timeline like a ghost is whether humanity's fate had to unfold this way, whether Prometheus was truly the only possible benefactor, or whether other divine interventions might have altered the course of human history even in his absence. Consider Hephaestus, the god of the forge, the divine craftsman whose workshop housed the fires that Prometheus stole in our reality. Of all the Olympian gods, Hephaestus has the most intimate relationship with fire and technology. His entire divine domain centers on the transformative power of flame to reshape metal, to craft weapons and tools and beautiful objects. In our timeline, he was the unwitting source of Prometheus's theft, his flame stolen while he worked. But could Hephaestus have been a deliberate benefactor instead? The god had reason to sympathize with the downtrodden. Cast from Olympus by his own mother Hera, disgusted by his appearance, Hephaestus understood rejection and suffering. He was mocked by other gods for his limp, for his soot-stained appearance, for his status as a craftsman laborer in a pantheon that valued beauty and martial prowess. Might this god of outsiders have looked at struggling humanity and seen something of himself? Might he have chosen to share his gifts in defiance of Zeus? The answer, in this timeline, appears to be no. Hephaestus, for all his skill and his marginalization, remains ultimately obedient to Zeus. Perhaps he fears the king of gods too much. Perhaps he recognizes that giving fire to humans would mean sharing his unique domain, potentially diminishing his own status among the gods. Or perhaps he simply doesn't care enough about mortals to risk divine wrath on their behalf. So his fires remain locked within Olympus, accessible only to gods, used to forge their weapons and ornaments while humans shiver in darkness below. What of Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, born from Zeus's head, her father's favorite child? Athena valued intelligence, cunning, and skillful craftsmanship. In our timeline, she became a patron of human heroes and civilizations, guiding Athens to greatness, teaching mortals various crafts and skills. Could she have intervened to give humans fire or some equivalent gift? Again, the answer seems to be no. Athena, despite her wisdom, is fundamentally loyal to Zeus and to the Olympian order. She was born from Zeus himself, quite literally of his essence, and her wisdom includes understanding when not to challenge paternal authority. Moreover, Athena's patronage in our timeline came after humans already had fire, already had the foundation for civilization. She guided and enhanced human efforts, but didn't provide the fundamental tools. Without that foundation, there is nothing for her to build upon, no civilizations to patronize, no heroes to mentor. The humans of the fireless world are too primitive to catch her interest. Apollo, god of light and culture, of music and prophecy, might he have taken pity on humanity's darkness? Apollo brought illumination in multiple senses, both literal sunlight during his daily journey across the sky and metaphorical enlightenment through the arts and oracles. But Apollo's light was never meant for human hands. His domain was to provide light from above, to illuminate, but not to share the source of illumination. The sun that Apollo guided across the sky could not be stolen or gifted in pieces. And Apollo, beautiful and proud, had little sympathy for creatures he saw as infinitely beneath him. Artemis, Apollo's twin, goddess of the hunt and wilderness, actually might prefer humanity's limited state. In our timeline, Artemis grew increasingly hostile toward human expansion as forests were cleared and wild places diminished. In the fireless world, The wilderness remains vast and unspoiled, which aligns with her values perfectly. She would have no motivation to help humans gain fire, as that would only enable them to eventually threaten her beloved wild spaces. Demeter, goddess of agriculture and harvest, seems like a possible benefactor. After all, fire is crucial for agricultural development. But Demeter's focus is on the earth's fertility, on crops and growing things, not on the technology that enables their cultivation. Moreover, in the fireless timeline, humans never develop agriculture, so Demeter has no reason to take particular interest in them. They gather wild plants, yes, but this is no different from what animals do. There is no cultivation for her to bless, no farms for her to protect. Hermes, the trickster god, the messenger, the patron of thieves and travelers, could he have played Prometheus's role? Hermes certainly had the cunning and the independence of spirit to defy Zeus if he chose. But Hermes's tricks in mythology were always more playful than rebellious, mischievous rather than revolutionary. He stole Apollo's cattle as a baby, but eventually returned them. He helped various heroes through clever schemes, but always within the bounds of Zeus's ultimate approval. Stealing fire for humanity would be a theft of entirely different magnitude, one with permanent consequences, and Hermes, for all his cleverness, lacks Prometheus's specific love for humanity that would motivate such a risk. What about the Titans who sided with Zeus during the Great War? Besides Prometheus, there were others who chose the winning side and earned places in the new order. But none of them had Prometheus's unique combination of foresight, connection to humanity, and willingness to act against divine authority. They were content with their positions in the new regime, happy to have avoided Tartarus, uninterested in rocking the boat by championing mortals. Could humans discover fire on their own without divine intervention? In our actual history, the control of fire by early humans was indeed discovered rather than gifted. Mythology aside, ancient humans learned to make and maintain fire through observation and experimentation. But the Greek mythological framework operates differently. In this timeline, fire is presented as inherently divine property, something not naturally available to mortals. Zeus has, through divine decree, separated fire from the human sphere. This raises metaphysical questions about the nature of fire in Greek mythology. Is fire in this timeline literally impossible for humans to create or find, blocked by divine magic? Or do humans simply lack the cognitive capacity to discover it without the initial gift? The myths suggest the former, that fire is divine essence, not merely a natural phenomenon, and that Zeus's decree makes it genuinely inaccessible to mortals unless deliberately given by a god. So in this timeline, humans cannot simply stumble upon fire-making techniques. They might observe lightning-struck fires and even try to preserve those flames, carrying burning branches from natural fires. But these attempts inevitably fail. The flames die out despite their best efforts, as if the fire itself rejects mortal custody. It's a cruel tease, showing humans what they're missing, but never allowing them to truly possess it. Zeus, meanwhile, actively ensures that no god breaks ranks. He makes clear through word and example that fire is not to be shared with mortals under any circumstances. Any god who considers defying this decree sees what happened to the Titans who opposed Zeus during the war, cast into Tartarus, eternally imprisoned, their suffering legend. The message is clear. Zeus's authority is absolute, and challenges to it are crushed mercilessly. The other Olympians, seeing both the reward for loyalty and the punishment for rebellion, fall in line. None loves humanity enough to risk Zeus's wrath. None sees sufficient benefit in empowering mortals to justify such danger. And so they maintain their divine privileges, their exclusive access to fire and all its advantages, while humanity languishes below. In a strange way, this makes Zeus's victory in the Titan War more complete in this timeline than in our own. In our reality, Prometheus's defiance proved that even a loyal Titan would choose conscience over obedience, that Zeus's authority could be challenged by someone motivated by compassion rather than power hunger. That defiance and Zeus's harsh response revealed limitations in Zeus's control and cracks in divine solidarity. But in the fireless timeline, there is no such challenge. Zeus's prohibition stands unchallenged for centuries, then millennia. His authority appears absolute, his will unquestioned. The divine order is stable, static, eternal. It's the cosmic hierarchy functioning exactly as Zeus always intended. Gods above, radiant and powerful. Mortals below, weak and worshipful. Yet this very stability contains a kind of stagnation. The gods become bored. Without human civilization developing, without heroes to watch and manipulate, without cities to patronize or destroy, without elaborate sacrifices and competitions for divine favor, the gods find the mortal world tediously unchanging. Humans remain too primitive to be interesting, too limited to provide entertainment or meaningful worship. And so, divine attention increasingly turns away from Earth entirely. The gods focus on their own dramas, their love affairs and rivalries, their competitions and schemes among themselves. The mortal world becomes an afterthought, barely noticed, rarely visited. Humanity exists in not just physical darkness, but in divine neglect, abandoned by the very beings who created them, forgotten in their suffering. This might be the cruelest fate of all, not active divine punishment, but complete divine indifference. At least in our timeline, the gods cared enough about humans to both help and harm them, to involve themselves in mortal affairs for good or ill. But in the fireless world, humanity is simply irrelevant, beneath notice, a failed experiment left to languish in obscurity. And through it all, Prometheus watches, remembers, regrets. He alone, among all the divine beings, continues to care about humanity's fate. He alone grieves for what might have been. He alone carries the weight of the path not taken, the gift not given, the choice that condemned his beloved creations to eternal darkness, the weight of might have been. As centuries accumulate into millennia, the fireless timeline reveals its ultimate trajectory, and it is one of gradual diminishment and eventual extinction. Humanity, lacking the tools to adapt beyond their narrow ecological niche, cannot survive the long-term changes that nature inevitably brings. Climate shifts that humans in our timeline could weather through technology and adaptation become existential threats here. When ice ages advance, pushing cold temperatures into regions humans inhabit, they have no means to cope. Without fire for warmth, without the ability to create insulated shelters, without clothing beyond raw hides, humans cannot survive in cooling climates. They must retreat before the ice, pushed into ever smaller territories, their populations contracting, their genetic diversity diminishing. But there is only so far to retreat. Eventually, The habitable zones become too small to support even the tiny human populations of this timeline. Bands become isolated from each other, unable to interbreed, vulnerable to local catastrophes. A drought in one region, a disease outbreak in another, a volcanic eruption elsewhere. Events that would be survivable for a widespread, technologically capable species become fatal for these scattered, powerless groups. Natural selection continues its work, but without technology to buffer its effects, humans cannot adapt quickly enough to major environmental changes. Evolution operates on timescales of thousands of generations, but environmental shifts can happen over just a few generations. The gap between rate of change and rate of adaptation becomes unbridgeable. Moreover, the cognitive limitations that the fireless existence imposes begin to compound over time. In our timeline, human brains actually increased in size over hundreds of thousands of years, driven partly by the advantages that greater intelligence provided and enabled by the better nutrition that cooked food offered. But in the fireless timeline, without cooked food's nutritional benefits, human brains might actually shrink over time. Maintaining a large brain requires tremendous caloric energy, and if that brain isn't providing sufficient survival advantages to justify its cost, natural selection will favor smaller, less energy-intensive brains. This creates a terrible downward spiral. Smaller brains mean less capacity for innovation and problem solving. Less innovation means continued technological stagnation. Continued stagnation means smaller brains continue to be favored. Each generation becomes, on average, slightly less cognitively capable than the last. The potential for civilization that Prometheus built into his clay creations slowly erodes under evolutionary pressure, bred out of the species because it confers no survival advantage in a world without tools. From Olympus, Zeus observes this gradual decline with satisfaction. This is exactly what he intended: humans remaining in their proper place, never rising to challenge divine supremacy, eventually fading away entirely as another failed species. He faces no rebellion, no mortal clever enough to trick or defy him, no civilizations that might grow powerful enough to concern him. His authority stands eternal and unchallenged. The other gods barely notice humanity's slow extinction. These mortals were never important enough to merit much attention anyway. If occasionally a god happens to observe the mortal world and notices there seem to be fewer humans than before, it's merely a passing observation, like noting that one type of bird seems less common than it used to be. Nothing to concern divine beings with their own ageless affairs to occupy them. Only Prometheus watches every stage of humanity's decline with anguish. His foresight shows him not just what is, but what could have been. As human populations dwindle, he sees the ghostly outlines of the cities that will never be built, the children who will never be born, the discoveries that will never be made. Each human death is a small tragedy, but the approaching extinction of the entire species is a catastrophe of cosmic proportions, potential snuffed out before it could ever manifest, consciousness emerging from clay only to sink back into oblivion. Does Prometheus consider acting even at this late stage? Does he think about stealing fire now, giving it to the last struggling human populations, hoping it might save them even at this desperate hour? Perhaps he does. Perhaps he stands again in Hephaestus's workshop, the familiar flames burning nearby, the hollow reed at hand, the path he didn't take before still available now. But even if he acts, it may be too late. The human populations have become so small, so scattered, so degraded in cognitive capacity that even with fire, they might not recover. The knowledge of how to use fire effectively, how to build on that gift to create civilization, requires cultural transmission across generations, requires populations large enough to support learning and innovation. These last humans, clinging to survival in isolated pockets, might receive fire and still fail to thrive because they lack the numbers, the social structures, the cognitive reserves to do anything meaningful with it. And so Prometheus doesn't act, or perhaps he does in one last desperate gesture, giving fire to a dying species in a futile attempt at redemption. But either way, the result is the same. Humanity fades from the earth, leaving behind only some scattered stone tools and bones, evidence that they once existed, but nothing to indicate they were anything more than another extinct megafauna, notable only for their slightly unusual tool use. In the end, the fireless timeline becomes a world where humanity is a might have been, a species that possessed the potential for greatness but never actualized it. Conscious beings who emerged from unconscious matter only to sink back into it, leaving barely a trace. The forests where they once foraged slowly erase even those traces, vines growing over their crude shelters, rains washing away their scattered tools, time dissolving the bones until even the evidence of their existence crumbles to dust. From a purely ecological perspective, the world continues functioning perfectly well. The forests that humans never cleared remain intact. The megafauna that humans never hunted to extinction thrive. The waters that humans never polluted run clear. In the amoral calculus of nature, humanity's extinction is neither good nor bad, merely one more species failing to adapt successfully to its environment. But from Prometheus's perspective, from the viewpoint of someone who loved these creatures and saw their potential, this timeline represents the ultimate tragedy. Not merely death, which comes to all mortal things, but death without meaning, extinction without achievement, potential that blazed briefly in his mind's eye, but never manifested in reality. Zeus calls it order. The natural hierarchy maintained, the proper places kept, divine authority unchallenged. The universe functioning as it should, with gods above and all other beings appropriately below. Prometheus calls it waste, cosmic scale waste of the most precious resource in existence, consciousness, intelligence, the capacity for wonder and creation and growth. He shaped these beings with his own hands, breathed awareness into them, and then watched as that awareness was slowly snuffed out by darkness and cold and fear, because he lacked the courage to give them the one tool that could have saved them. In the millennia after humanity's extinction, Prometheus continues his existence on Olympus, his body whole, but his spirit shattered. He is the Titan who created a species and then failed them so completely that they vanished from existence. His foresight, once his defining trait, becomes his curse. He can still see the alternate timeline, the world where he made a different choice, where humans still live and build and create. That ghost world haunts him with increasing vividness as the centuries pass. Does he ever confess his regret to Zeus? Does he ever admit that he wishes he had acted differently, that humanity's extinction weighs on him like a physical burden? Perhaps he does, in a moment of weakness, hoping for some acknowledgement, or perhaps even some divine understanding. But Zeus merely smiles. You made the right choice, Prometheus. You chose order over chaos, divine authority over mortal presumption. You should be proud of your wisdom. And Prometheus realizes that Zeus understood all along. The king of gods knew exactly what he was doing when he withheld fire, knew that Prometheus would struggle with the decision, knew that either outcome, defiance or compliance, would serve Zeus's purposes. If Prometheus stole the fire, Zeus got the satisfaction of brutal punishment. If Prometheus didn't steal it, Zeus got the satisfaction of breaking the Titan's spirit without even laying a hand on him, of making Prometheus into his own torturer through guilt and regret. In a strange way, this fate is worse than the eagle and the mountain. Physical pain ends eventually, even for immortals. In our timeline, Heracles eventually freed Prometheus from his torment. But the pain of regret, of knowing you could have acted differently, of seeing clearly what was lost through your inaction, that pain has no end, no rescue, no Heracles to shoot it down. It is eternal, self-inflicted, a prison made of might-have-beens. And so Prometheus endures, the Titan of forethought, who foresaw what humanity needed but didn't provide it, who created beings of tremendous potential but left them to perish in darkness, who carries forever the knowledge of the path not taken and the world that never was. The irony is perfect and terrible. Prometheus gave humans existence but not life, consciousness but not enlightenment, hands capable of holding fire but no fire to hold. He created them incomplete and kept them that way, a sculptor who shaped his masterpiece but refused to fire the clay, leaving it fragile and unfinished, vulnerable to the elements, doomed to eventually crumble and return to dust. Fire's true nature. To understand what was truly lost in the fireless timeline, we must contemplate fire's deeper meaning beyond its practical applications. Fire in Greek mythology was never merely a tool or resource. It represented something far more fundamental to the nature of existence itself, and to the boundary between mortal and divine. Fire was considered a divine element, the property of gods, associated with Zeus's lightning and Hephaestus's forge. In the Greek understanding, fire connected heaven and earth, mortality and immortality, darkness and enlightenment. When humans sacrificed to gods, they burned offerings, and the smoke rose to Olympus, carrying mortal prayers and tributes to divine ears. Fire was the medium of communication between realms, the bridge across which mortals and immortals could interact. But more than this, fire represented transformation itself. It was the force that changed raw into cooked, cold into warm, ore into metal, darkness into light. Fire took one thing and made it into something else, breaking down existing forms and creating new ones. In this sense, fire was fundamentally creative, generative, almost magical in its capacity to reshape reality. And this is precisely why Zeus feared giving it to humans. Fire wasn't just useful, it was transformative in a way that threatened the static divine order. Gods were meant to be unchanging, eternal, perfect. Mortals were meant to be temporary, limited, fixed in their nature. But fire gave mortals the power of transformation, the ability to change their circumstances, to reshape their environment, to become something other than what they were created to be. When Prometheus stole fire in our timeline, he wasn't just giving humans a heat source or a tool. He was giving them the fundamental capacity for change, for growth, for self-determination. He was giving them, in essence, a spark of the divine. Not divinity itself, but the transformative power that characterized divine action. This is why Zeus reacted so violently. The theft represented a fundamental challenge to the cosmic hierarchy. an assertion that mortals could possess and wield powers that Zeus wanted reserved for gods alone. In the fireless timeline, humans never receive this transformative capacity. They remain exactly what Prometheus initially created them to be: clever animals, but still animals, trapped in the state of nature without the means to transcend it. They cannot transform themselves or their world. They are subject to nature's whims, unable to reshape circumstance, unable to choose their own path forward. The absence of fire means the absence of hope in the most profound sense. Hope is predicated on the belief that the future can be different from the present, that current suffering is not permanent, that human effort can improve conditions. But in the fireless world, the future is always the same as the present. Each generation lives exactly as the previous one did. There is no basis for hope because there is no mechanism for change. This is what makes Prometheus's decision, or indecision, in this timeline so consequential. By withholding fire, he withholds not just a technology, but the very possibility of progress, the fundamental human capacity to imagine and create a better world. He keeps humanity in a state of eternal childhood, aware enough to suffer, but powerless to do anything about that suffering. The myth of Prometheus in our timeline has resonated across centuries precisely because it captures something essential about human nature: our capacity for defiance, for reaching beyond our prescribed limitations, for stealing the gods' fire in whatever form that takes. Prometheus became a symbol of human aspiration, of the rebel who acts according to conscience despite terrible consequences, of the price of progress and enlightenment. But in the fireless timeline, there is no such myth because there is no such defiance. There is only obedience, limitation, stagnation. The humans who might have told Prometheus's story never developed the language or culture to tell any stories beyond the most basic. The consciousness that might have recognized Prometheus as a hero and champion never fully develops. So even Prometheus's internal struggle, his guilt and regret, goes unwitnessed and unacknowledged by those he agonizes over. The question that haunts this alternate timeline is whether Zeus was right. By withholding fire, by keeping humans limited, did he prevent suffering or merely change its form? In our timeline, fire enabled civilization, but civilization brought new kinds of suffering: war, slavery, inequality, environmental destruction, and eventually the capacity for mass violence on scales unimaginable to our ancestors. The fire that warmed also burned. The knowledge that enlightened also enabled atrocity. Zeus might argue that he was merciful in the fireless timeline. He kept humans from the suffering that progress brings. They never knew war on civilizational scales, never experienced the cruelty that humans inflict on each other when organized into complex societies, never faced the existential dilemmas that consciousness and technology create. They lived and died as animals live and die, in pain often, certainly, but in a kind of innocent ignorance, never knowing what they were missing. But Prometheus, in his torment, would reject this argument absolutely. The suffering of ignorance is not mercy. The pain of unrealized potential is not kindness. Better to live briefly as a self-aware, self-determining being capable of both greatness and terrible mistakes than to exist for any length of time as a conscious creature trapped in powerless suffering, aware enough to feel pain but not equipped to alleviate it. The tragedy of the fireless timeline is that both perspectives contain truth. Zeus is correct that fire brought new forms of suffering to humanity. Prometheus is correct that without fire, humans never truly lived, never achieved the potential they were created with. The two truths sit in tension, unresolved, irresolvable. What does the fireless timeline tell us about the nature of gifts and curses, of progress and its price? It suggests that these categories may be less distinct than we imagine. Fire was simultaneously the greatest gift and the source of terrible troubles. Its absence removed both the benefits and the costs, leaving humanity in a state that was neither blessed nor cursed in the dramatic sense. Just poor, nasty, brutish, short, and ultimately futile. Perhaps the deepest insight is that consciousness itself is only meaningful when coupled with agency. The fireless humans possess awareness. They experience their lives. They suffer and occasionally feel pleasure. But without the capacity to change their circumstances, without tools to act upon the world meaningfully, their consciousness serves only to make them suffer more acutely than unconscious beings would. They are cursed with just enough awareness to know they are cold, hungry, and afraid, but not enough capacity to do anything about it. This is Prometheus's ultimate failure in this timeline. Not that he didn't give humans fire specifically, but that he didn't complete his creation. He made them conscious, but left them powerless, gave them minds that could grasp problems, but not hands adequate to solve them, created beings capable of wanting more, but gave them no path to achieve it. He made them fundamentally incomplete, and then refused to provide what was needed to complete them. The fire that remains locked on Olympus in this timeline is more than elemental flame. It is potential never realized, transformation never achieved, the divine spark that should have ignited human greatness, but instead remains confined, hoarded, deliberately withheld. It burns eternal in Hephaestus's forge, warming gods and illuminating divine halls, while far below in darkness, the last humans huddle cold and afraid, dying slowly without ever knowing that warmth was possible, that light was real, that they were meant for more than this endless, fearful darkness. Reflection and what might still be as we reach the end of this journey through the timeline that never was, we return to our own reality with new appreciation for what Prometheus's gift truly meant. The myth of Prometheus and his theft of fire has endured for millennia not as a simple story of crime and punishment, but as a profound meditation on human nature, on the price of progress, on the relationship between suffering and meaning. In our world, Prometheus saw humanity suffering in darkness and cold, and he made a choice. He knew the consequences. Zeus's wrath was predictable and terrible. Yet he acted anyway, driven by compassion for his creations and by the foresight that showed him what humans could become if given the right tools. He stole fire from the gods, delivered it to mortals, and accepted his punishment. Chained to a mountain, his liver devoured daily by an eagle, eternal torment for an eternal being. That punishment was real and terrible, but it had meaning. Prometheus suffered for something. His agony purchased something precious. And humans, with fire in their possession, began the long, difficult, amazing journey towards civilization. They built fires for warmth and gathered around them, developing complex language and rich cultures. They cooked food and their brains grew larger, their intelligence deepening. They worked metal and created tools that let them reshape their environment. They built cities, developed writing, created art and philosophy and science. The journey was not easy. Fire brought warmth, but also burns. Knowledge brought enlightenment, but also the capacity for cruelty. Civilization brought comfort, but also inequality and war. Every advancement came with costs. Every gift Prometheus gave created new problems, even as it solved old ones. The path from darkness to enlightenment was not straight or smooth, but winding and difficult, marked by as much suffering as triumph. But it was a path. There was movement, growth, change. Humans were not trapped in eternal stasis, but engaged in an ongoing project of becoming, of creating themselves and their world through effort and intelligence and the tools that fire made possible. They were not perfect, far from it, but they were alive in the fullest sense, agents of their own fate, bearers of consciousness that could actually shape reality rather than merely endure it. The alternate timeline we've explored tonight shows us what we would have lost if Prometheus had made a different choice. A world where humans remain trapped in darkness, cognitively stunted, culturally impoverished, eventually extinct. A world where potential went unrealized, where consciousness existed only to suffer without purpose or growth, where the divine spark that should have ignited human greatness remained forever locked away. Comparing the two timelines reveals an uncomfortable truth. Progress is not inevitable. The human story of rising from primitive conditions to civilization required specific conditions, specific choices, specific gifts. Without Prometheus's intervention, our species might have ended as a footnote in natural history, a slightly clever primate that existed briefly and then vanished, leaving no legacy beyond some scattered bones and stone tools. This should inspire both gratitude and responsibility. Gratitude for the gift we received, for the Titan who cared enough about humanity to defy Zeus and accept terrible punishment on our behalf. Prometheus is, in many ways, the first rebel, the first figure in Western mythology to act from conscience against authority, to choose compassion over obedience, to sacrifice himself for others. His myth established a template that would echo through our culture for millennia: the righteous rebel, the suffering servant, the one who brings light to those in darkness at terrible personal cost. But also responsibility, because the fire Prometheus gave us is powerful and dangerous. We are the heirs of that theft, the beneficiaries of that defiance. What we do with fire, both literally and metaphorically, both the actual flames and all the knowledge and power that fire represents, determines whether Prometheus's sacrifice was worthwhile. In our time, we face consequences of fire that ancient Greeks could never have imagined. We have taken the transformative power of flame and amplified it through technology to the point where we can reshape the entire planet, for better or worse. We can split atoms and manipulate genes and send our voices around the world at the speed of light. We have powers that rival the gods of Olympus in their scope and impact. And with those powers come Zeus's original concerns. Are mortals capable of wielding divine-level powers responsibly? Do we have the wisdom to match our capability? When we reshape the world with our technological fire, do we create something better or merely different? These are not easy questions, and the answers are not clear. The fireless timeline suggests that limitation is not the answer. Keeping humans trapped in powerless ignorance prevents the mistakes and suffering that come with power, yes, but only by preventing life itself from being truly lived. The absence of fire's dangers came at the cost of fire's benefits, and the net result was not safety or peace, but merely meaninglessness, suffering without the possibility of overcoming it, consciousness without the capacity to act upon it. So we are left with fire's paradox. It burns and it warms. It destroys and it creates. It brings suffering and it enables the transcendence of suffering. We cannot have its gifts without its dangers, and attempting to avoid all danger by refusing all gifts leaves us in the fireless darkness we explored tonight. Cold, afraid, and ultimately doomed. The myth of Prometheus teaches us that progress requires risk, that knowledge comes with responsibility, that the price of remaining safe and small is remaining trapped and meaningless. It teaches us that sometimes defiance is necessary, that conscience should triumph over obedience when obedience means allowing preventable suffering, that gifts given in compassion matter even when they complicate the recipient's existence. In the fireless timeline, Prometheus chose safety over defiance, divine approval over human need, his own comfort over his creation's advancement. And the result was catastrophic, not because of dramatic collapse, but because of slow, grinding diminishment unto extinction. The Titan who created humanity watched them fade from existence, carrying forever the knowledge that he could have saved them, but chose not to, that he foresaw their fate, but lacked the courage to change it. In our timeline, Prometheus chose differently. He acted from love and foresight, accepting terrible consequences so that humanity might have a chance. His liver was devoured daily, his body chained to stone, his suffering eternal. But his legacy was human civilization in all its messy, complicated, magnificent reality. Every fire that has burned in human hands since that mythical theft, every forge and hearth and lamp, every candle lit against darkness, every metaphorical flame of knowledge or passion or hope, all of these trace back to that moment of divine defiance, that choice to give rather than withhold, to risk rather than remain safe. We are Prometheus's children in the deepest sense, not just descended from the clay he shaped, but inheritors of the fire he stole, bearers of the transformative power he delivered at such cost. Our consciousness, our capacity for change, our ability to imagine and create futures different from our present, these are the fruits of his rebellion, the gifts purchased by his suffering. And so we owe him not just gratitude, but emulation. When we see suffering we can prevent, knowledge we can share, gifts we can give, we face our own Promethean moment. Do we act despite risks and costs? Do we share what we have, even when it complicates our own existence? Do we choose compassion over caution, defiance over obedience, when obedience means allowing preventable harm? The fireless timeline shows us what happens when the answer is no. When those with power and knowledge refuse to share it with those who lack it. When fear and self-preservation triumph over compassion. When the divine spark remains locked away rather than being spread to those who need it. The result is darkness, stagnation, and eventual extinction. But our timeline, the one we actually inhabit, shows us what happens when the answer is yes. When Prometheus defied Zeus, when he stole fire despite knowing the consequences, when he chose humanity's advancement over his own safety, he lit a flame that has burned for tens of thousands of years and shows no signs of extinguishing. That flame has illuminated caves and palaces, warmed the cold and powered industry, enabled cooking and metallurgy and chemistry and all the intricate web of technologies that define human civilization. The flame has burned destructively at times, certainly. Wars have been fought with fire's weapons. Forests have fallen to fire's clearing. The atmosphere now carries the signature of millennia of burning. Prometheus's gift has enabled both creation and destruction, both enlightenment and atrocity, both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty. But it has enabled humanity to be fully human. Conscious beings who can shape their own destiny, who can imagine alternatives and work toward them, who can suffer but also overcome suffering, who can fail but also achieve, who can make terrible mistakes but also learn from them and do better. Fire made us capable of both our worst and our best, and in choosing to give it, Prometheus chose to give us life in its fullest, most complicated, most meaningful sense. In the quiet moments when you sit beside a fire, whether a campfire under stars, a fireplace warming your home, or even the metaphorical fires of creativity and passion that burn within, think of Prometheus. Think of the Titan chained to his mountain, suffering eternally so that you might have that warmth, that light, that transformative power in your hands. Think of the choice he made, the price he paid, the love that motivated him to defy the King of Gods for the sake of beings made from clay. And think of the alternate Prometheus we explored tonight, the one who chose differently, who let fear triumph over compassion, who withheld the gift and watched his creations fade into darkness and extinction. That Prometheus avoided Zeus's punishment, but inflicted something worse upon himself: eternal regret, the knowledge of the path not taken, the vision of what could have been but never was. Between these two versions of the Titan lies a profound question about the nature of meaning and purpose. Is it better to suffer for something, or to avoid suffering by avoiding action? Is it better to give a dangerous gift, or to withhold it for safety? Is it better to enable others to make their own mistakes, or to keep them limited and dependent? Is it better to light a candle and risk the flame spreading uncontrollably, or to remain in darkness where at least you cannot be burned? The myth of Prometheus, in our timeline, answers clearly: light the candle, take the risk, give the gift, accept the consequences. Suffering that purchases meaning is preferable to comfort that purchases only emptiness. The fire that might burn is better than the cold that certainly kills. The knowledge that enables both good and evil is better than the ignorance that enables only suffering without purpose. This is why Prometheus endures as a symbol, why his myth resonates across cultures and centuries, why we still tell his story millennia after the ancient Greeks first sang of him. He represents something essential about human aspiration: our refusal to accept limitation, our hunger for knowledge and power, our willingness to defy authority when authority demands unjust submission, our capacity to act from love even when the cost is terrible. Prometheus is the champion of consciousness over oblivion, of agency over passivity, of meaning over mere existence. He chose to give humanity the tools to become something more than we were created to be, knowing that those tools would be misused at times, but believing that the possibility of greatness justified the risk of failure. In the fireless world we imagine tonight, he made the opposite choice, and humanity paid the ultimate price. Not death alone, but death without achievement, suffering without growth, consciousness without purpose, potential forever unrealized. That world stands as a warning of what is lost when courage fails, when compassion is outweighed by fear, when the powerful refuse to share power with those who need it. But in our world, Prometheus's courage did not fail. His compassion triumphed. He stole the fire, delivered it to humanity, and accepted his punishment. And we, thousands of generations later, are still benefiting from that ancient theft, still living by the light of that stolen flame, still warmed by the gift a Titan gave at such terrible cost. As you go about your life, using fire in all its forms, literally cooking your food and warming your home, metaphorically learning and creating and loving and striving, remember the gift's origins. Remember that someone saw you in darkness and chose to bring you light, even knowing the price. Remember that your capacity to shape your world, to learn and grow and become, was purchased by a Titan's eternal suffering. And when you face your own Promethean moments, when you must choose between safety and service, between withholding and giving, between accepting unjust order and rebelling for conscience's sake, remember both timelines. Remember what Prometheus gained by giving and what he would have lost by withholding. Remember that the fire in your hands is both gift and responsibility, both privilege and obligation. The myth ends, in our traditional telling, with Prometheus eventually freed by Heracles, his suffering finally ended after millennia of torment. Zeus relented, the Titan was unbound, and he took his place among the gods, having paid the price for his defiance. But his gift remained with humanity, unrecalled, permanent, the foundation upon which all subsequent human achievement was built. In the fireless timeline, there is no such resolution. Prometheus remains on Olympus, unbound physically, but trapped eternally in regret, watching an empty world where his creations once struggled and finally vanished. No hero comes to free him, because without fire, no heroes develop. No redemption is possible because the consequences of his choice, or failure to choose, are irreversible. Which ending is preferable? The suffering that leads to eventual redemption and lasting legacy, or the avoidance of suffering that leads to eternal regret and total failure? The answer seems clear when framed this way, yet how many times do we, in our own lives, choose the second path? How often do we withhold gifts we could give, avoid actions we could take, refuse risks we should accept, all to avoid potential suffering, all to maintain our own comfort and safety? The myth of Prometheus calls us to something higher. It reminds us that meaningful existence requires risk, that safety purchased at the cost of purpose is not truly safety, but merely slow death, that the fire we fear to touch is the same fire that makes us fully alive. So take the fire, use it wisely, but use it, build with it, create with it, warm yourself and others with it. Let it illuminate your path and transform your world. Accept that it will sometimes burn, that power brings danger, that knowledge complicates existence. But remember always that the alternative, the cold, dark, fireless world where humanity huddles afraid and slowly fades into extinction, is far worse than any danger the flame presents. Prometheus gave us fire, not just as a tool, but as a trust. He believed in us enough to risk everything for our sake. He saw our potential clearly enough to defy the King of Gods to help us realize it. He loved us enough to suffer eternally so that we might live fully. We honor that trust not by using fire perfectly, we never will, but by using it courageously, by refusing to let fear make us extinguish the flames, by passing the gift forward to those who come after us just as it was passed to us. Every generation must be Prometheus to the next, stealing divine fire if necessary, defying unjust limitations, giving the gifts that enable growth, even when those gifts come with risks. The fireless timeline haunts us with its emptiness, its wasted potential, its slow fade into meaningless extinction. But it is not our timeline. We live in the world where Prometheus chose courage, where fire burns in human hands, where consciousness is coupled with capability, where we are not merely subject to fate, but shapers of it. As this night draws to a close, and you return to your life warmed and illuminated by fire in all its forms, both literal and metaphorical, carry with you the gratitude and the responsibility that Prometheus's gift demands. Be worthy of the theft, justify the suffering, make the rebellion meaningful by using the gift well, by sharing it generously, by refusing to let fear extinguish the flame that makes us human. The fire burns. It will always burn, passed from hand to hand across generations, lighting the darkness, warming the cold, transforming the world one spark at a time. And in that eternal flame, Prometheus's choice, his courage, his compassion, his defiance, continues to illuminate our path, showing us not just where we are, but what we might become. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the darkness of what might have been. If you enjoyed exploring this alternate mythology with me tonight, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Mystic Nightfall. Your support helps me continue creating these deep dives into the stories that have shaped human imagination for millennia. Until next time, may your own fires burn bright, and may you never take for granted the light you carry in your hands, the gift stolen by a titan, purchased by suffering, given in love, and passed forward through countless generations to reach you tonight. Sleep well, dream of fire and the beings who dared to bring it to us. And remember that every flame you see is an echo of that ancient rebellion, that original defiance, that choice to give rather than withhold, to risk rather than remain safe, to light the darkness no matter the cost. Good night.